So, good morning, wherever you're at. I did just return from Ireland last night, where I took this solo sabbatical, this spiritual odyssey, connecting to my roots and my family tree. And I met up with some really fine, formidable, as Mary put it, formidable female leaders and healers. Yeah, that was her word. And I was like, yeah, that really does define them, from different cultures and from different countries. And we all together tapped into something sacred, acknowledging ancestral traumas and answering our dawn. And dawn is an Irish word that means your craft or your calling. I'm going to show off with a few Irish words that I picked up, so just bear with me. So in order to answer our dawn, we need to root and we need to reach. We're always, no matter how much you've rooted in your life and no matter how much you've reached in your life, even in this moment, you're only ever still a small concept of possibility. And within this small concept of possibility lives orchards and orchards of infinite invitations for you. And we don't want to forget that. Sometimes in our culture, we think, oh, I'm too old, or it's too late, or never. It's never, ever, ever too late. And people are showing us that time and time again to move past these limitations. So we're always just that seed, the unseen side of things, just waiting to get pushed into the dark womb of creation. And the dark room of creation is like that soil of intentionality and emptiness. Emptiness because you have to let go of what you think you know. Speaking of seeds and of entering the womb, uh, today is my daughter Billy's birthday, and her life is an exceptional example of moving past the constructs of possibility, of moving into the infinite mystery, because she's an example of that life unapologetically wants to know itself and move into form. When she was born, she came through a father who was sterile and a mother who was reluctant. How can some child be born from a sterile father and a reluctant mother? And yet life is like, oh, I'm here, I'm showing up. So things will push through you, and you can be pushed by pain or pulled by vision. And we want to allow ourselves to be pulled by vision. And so she came. Will was sterile from chemotherapy. And at least we thought he was, but it turns out he had one or two sperm in there, and they were good swimmers, the doctor said. And I, at the time, had a 5-year-old son, and I was like, oh, I'm done. You know, I already raised my kids. And, but I was wrong. And life proves us wrong time and time again as we stay rooted in the present and reaching for the divine. It's a joy to see people fulfill their dawn. It's a joy for me to see my daughter fulfill her dawn. As we fulfill our dawn, we live in the great mystery. That's where it comes from. And in experience the great mystery, we actually experience a great Saoirse, like Saoirse Ronan, you know, this actress. Her name is Saoirse, and in Irish that means freedom. So when you let yourself move into the mystery, you experience this freedom because it's no longer being pushed and gripped by your own desires. You allow it to flow through you. And then the other Irish word that I'll share with you when you move into the great mystery is nart, kind of like heart, but with an N, which means strength and abundance, or being a part of something greater than yourself. And when you allow yourself to be part of something greater than yourself, the bigger part of it takes care of you. It's so beautiful to witness that. And I got to experience that when I went to Ireland, and I wasn't really trying to figure it out. I just saw this invitation, you know, come reconnect with your ancestral roots. It was called homecoming. And I was like, oh, this is for me, you know. And so sometimes that happens in the world and in your life. You'll go, oh, this is for me, and then boom, 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 all of these things. No, I can't go. No, I can't do this. I don't have that. I'm not ready, you know. And you just have to stay in the mystery. And I pressed the button and I said, well, let's see how God's going to figure this out. And man, she did. You know, Mary came and picked me up. We got to have an amazing time. She came to the studio. Olive happened to be going to the airport the same day I was going to the airport. These beautiful synchronicities catch and carry us. when we allow ourselves to live in the faithful play of God. And so I'm sharing these words with you, these Irish words with you, not because it's so joyful for me to continue to reconnect with my ancestral roots, but also because connecting with the mystical nature of trees is actually a part of the Irish language. The magical thing about Ireland and its first language was which was Ogham, Ogham, is that it dates back to the 4th century, and I Ogham, I think I'm saying it correctly, but I could be wrong. Ogham was affectionately called tree alphabet because it was based on trees. Each Ogham letter is associated with a tree that begins with the sound of that letter. So each letter, like say our A, B, and C, but their alphabet depicts a different tree, and there's 25 of them. I think that's wonderful. I think that's amazing. I'm going to read the names of the trees, and I would love for you to just settle in and let the names of the trees invite you into the forest of this conversation. And as I read those names, maybe you can close your eyes and see if you can recall in your mind your relationship to this type of tree when I say its name. And some you may know, some you may remember, others you may not be familiar with. So stay open because you may actually, no, you do actually know them at the very root of your being because you're connected with all knowledge. And because you're connected with all knowledge, the information can bubble up within you and represent itself to you as you close your eyes and imagine the name, the echo, the meaning that this name carries. So here are the names of the 25 alphabets of OM for the Irish alphabet. The birch tree, the sassafras tree, the hickory tree, the sycamore tree, the willow tree, the hawthorn tree, the oak tree, the holly tree, the hazel tree, the apple tree, the wild grape tree, the blackberry tree, the cattail tree, the black locust tree, the elder tree, the spruce tree, the hemlock tree, the laurel tree, the tulip tree, the cedar tree, the grove tree, the cherry tree, the maple tree, the beech tree, and the white pine tree. These are the alphabet of the original Irish language. I just think that's wonderful. According to Celtic mythology, a hazel tree was the first creation on earth. And this hazel tree grew upon this well of wisdom. And it was said to have held all the knowledge of the universe within its branches. And when a salmon in the well of wisdom ate the nut that fell from the hazel tree, it obtained all of the knowledge of the universe that the tree bore, and it became the salmon of wisdom or the salmon of knowledge. That was one smart fish. It's funny because sometimes you see Jesus connected with this logo of the fish. I find that to be interesting. The legend goes on to say that the first man to eat this salmon would have then all the knowledge passed on to them. And the man who did so was called Finn McCool. What a great name, right? Finn McCool. It's spelled very differently than how it sounds. And Finn would later use this knowledge to become the leader of his tribe, a band of warriors. And in the Irish mythology, they were the ones that kept Ireland safe. And another fun fact about Finn is that he's said to have been 50 feet tall. Now, I don't know if we can blame that on the Irish storytelling exaggeration that happens. But anyway, he's 50 feet tall and he has a magical thumb. I don't know about the magical thumb, but maybe that's where we get the idea of having a green thumb. So this wisdom comes from the nut of the hazel tree, and the Irish, they just love their trees so much that they base their language on it, and they intuitively respect the lessons of the tree. They're very close to the earth, as many cultures are. There are extraordinary structures of trees inspire them to remember to let their roots spread underground and let their branches reach into the heavens. And ancient cults perceived that trees, because they were able to do this, because they were able to root down and reach up, were actually doorways to the underworld and to the heavens. And I think, when we get still and we remember what the Celts knew, um, that trees can be a threshold to great wisdom, that trees do carry great wisdom. And so I hope that you start to think about and reincorporate that tool into your life. From the sacred trees of, well, the tree of the Garden of Eden, to the redwood forest trees who understand fita fata. Fita fata is another Irish word meaning interwoven. That's a beautiful word, that we're all fita fata. Then we have our trees, our Christmas tree, at the holiest time of the year, we venture out and we bring in this esteemed guest into our homes, a spruce or a fern or a pine tree. And we place this tree in our homes and we dress them like gods and drag queens, and we sprinkle lights and, all sorts of cranberries and popcorn and, all things, that anything we can put on the tree for our memories, we put on the trees. And then we get drunk on their beauty as we just sit on the couch and stare at them like they're newborn babies. I don't think I'm just speaking for myself. If you have fallen in love with a Christmas tree some cold night in the winter, just make me feel not so alone and add it to the chat. So, and then of course we have palm trees, whose images are so powerful. Just seeing a palm tree, the logo of a palm tree, if you place that on a towel or a bag, you think, "Ooh, fancy. Is this a spa?" So it's interesting what trees tell us. Trees give us messages and they carry messages for us. Oh, we've been using trees to carry our messages for so long. People whisper their secrets into trees. Or even in a more, earthly way, that we carve our names into trees, don't we? We carve our names with our sweethearts into trees, and lovers and mothers who hope for the return of their sons and daughters from war will tie a yellow ribbon round an old oak tree. In the Irish mythology, we have the hawthorn tree, whose medicine is first cousins with rose bushes. And so those of us who are herbalists, I don't mean to include myself in that, I'm not a herbalist, but some people here are very close to earth and they understand the herbs. They know that the rose bush is really connected to the heart, and you can make rose tea. Well, hawthorn is very much like that. If you know somebody who's an herbalist and your heart is broken, you can ask them for a tincture if you believe in that. Everything here is a placebo, but I think some placebos are just a little bit more lovely than others. I mean, what's the difference between a few drops of hawthorn oil or an aspirin? I don't know. It's what you mean, what you make of it. So anyway, in the Irish mythology, we have the hawthorn tree, who's so close to the rose bush. It's about your heart, and the hawthorn grows near sacred wells. And the people in these cultures, they'll tie cloties to the tree, which are ribbons or rags, and they make petitions and prayers. And these trees, they end up looking like something so beautiful with these colorful ribbons and these rags and these medallions. They just like our Christmas trees, they tie all sorts of things to the trees. And then they call these trees fairy trees. Now, here's a funny thing, or interesting at least. The fairy tree predates the Christmas tree. Fairy trees have been associated with midwinter festivals for thousands of years, while the modern Christmas tree originated in Germany in the 1400s. And so these fairy trees, they're the ancestors of these Christmas trees. In Irish mythology, these fairy trees were sacred trees that were thought to be portals to other worlds, to the realms of the fairies. So I just find that very interesting. So whether you're conscious of it or not, whether you're a tree hugger like me, or a tree climber, like I saw some women climbing trees this weekend, or maybe you're a swinger who likes to swing on swings from trees, or maybe you just speak to trees, or maybe you just listen. I think we all can finally confess what the Celts knew, that trees hold big wisdom. And maybe you have even had a special relationship with a tree. And if so, maybe you want to think about that. Maybe you'll share that during our conversation. So there's another Irish word I wanted to share with you, which is shamathar, which means grandmother. And we had this great big grandmother lemon Meyer tree in California that was so magnificent that every day it offered us an opportunity to make a fresh batch of lemonade. I was so sad when we moved from that tree. Like, if you asked me what I miss most about California, it was that tree. That's kind of weird, but I really did love that tree. I would sit underneath it every day. I would get on my prayer calls. I told you a couple weeks ago that I worked at World Ministry of Prayer, and I would just sit on my backyard, make a fresh batch of lemonade from my tree. And then it would nurture me through all of this prayers. I don't know, when you have a relationship with that, like that, it's hard to forget. In Los Angeles, we also had jacaranda trees. I don't know if you know about them. They bloom purple. They're magnificent. And while we were there, we also planted a California pepper tree, which is a beautiful tree that makes you look like your eyes are blurry because it just sort of weeps, and it just sort of, it's an incredible tree. We planted that tree when Liam was born. And well, we placed his placenta in the ground. We didn't know what to do with it. The midwife left it at our house. We're like, well, let's just bury it. That seems right. So we planted a California pepper tree, and it's still there. So one day I was outside my home in Los Angeles, and it was next to Laurel Canyon. So they have these big old trees there. And I saw this couple staring up at my neighbor's house where they have this tree. And I asked them what they were doing. And they told me that they had lived in the house way back in the day, and that lightning had struck that tree and had tore it right in half. And they called the tree doctor because they loved that tree so much. And the man came out and he bound the tree with a great piece of metal that held the tree together. And all these years later, the tree had expanded past the confines of that band, and to the point where you couldn't even see it. Like I didn't believe it, but they were told me it was there. And I watched them take in this tree with such reverence. The neighborhood had changed, the house had grown bigger and they'd all changed. And, the couple had changed. They had grown older, but the tree stayed loyal. The tree was still there. There's a noble nature of trees, although it might seem a strange subject for Sunday morning. I think that if you spend any amount of time thinking about it, you will find that you have a deep appreciation for these, I would call, regal beings. They're like guardians. They don't judge us. Instead, they offer up an arboretum of peace if we're willing to walk amongst them and be conscious with them. Going into nature, you feel a great sense of peace. I hope that you include this in your spiritual practice. Because for the most part, when you go into nature, you don't make a habit of judging trees or assessing trees. You just kind of like take them in, and you just allow nature to be as they are. And wouldn't this be nice if we kind of played this whole way of being with people too? And we just enjoy nature for what it is, a place where we can experience the benefits of non-judgmental experience. And another thing that we don't always notice while in nature is that not only are we not judging trees, but they are not judging us. So we can walk barefoot and braless. We can walk absolutely naked if we want to, as long as nobody calls the cops. And the forest will never make us feel ashamed or embarrassed. If you want to be ashamed or embarrassed, you will need people for that. You will need to leave nature and go into the marketplace. And in the marketplace, you get to experience the judge fest that passes sometimes for engagement. So it's nice to take a break from that and restore our state of Holy Communion with trees so that we can go back into the market and stay in that space of bliss and appreciation for all things exactly as they are. So with all this goodness from trees, you might recall a tree in your life and the relationship you had with it, or maybe create a relationship with a tree. My son Ryan, when we first moved here, he found one of those willy whirly things that fall from trees, that you sometimes make mustaches out of. Anyway, or you stick to your nose. And he planted it. He planted it in just this little planter that we had. And now the tree is past the size of our house. It's higher than our house. And that was only like 10 years ago. We have a pal here, Carol Ham and Mari, our amazing singer today, who have invested in memberships at their local arboretum, and they go there like they go to church. And Jody and I, we walk Salt Creek. That's where we walk every day. And several of the trees in the Salt Creek, they're too impressive not to address. And we go, oh, there's our tree, And it's just amazing to be able to establish relationship with trees. And whenever I see a fallen tree in the forest, I always take a moment. This will just show you really how weird I am. And I just say to the tree, thank you for your service. It's a nice practice, you know? Beth Gordon talks about the trees in her yard, and she talks about them as if they're raising children, like she'll tell you the history of her trees. My husband Will, he's planted 20 trees on this property alone. That's a lot of trees. So we come from a community of tree people. And that's why I love our logo so much. The Speakeasy logo is a symbol of balance. As fate would have it, the allegory of the tree with all of its wisdom found its way into our Speakeasy community as our logo. And at first glance, it appears as simply a tree held in this sunburst. But when we look closer, you'll see that there's two well-rooted figures. Can you see them? And they're each sort of praising God in different directions. I love that about our logo because it reflects that our community has a deep commitment to honoring all paths and all spiritual traditions, no matter what direction they go in. And these figures are firmly grounded in the present moment while simultaneously reaching towards the divine in prayer, a beautiful metaphor for our own spiritual journey. You look even closer and you will discover another layer of meaning. The two figures also form two hands. Can you see the two hands that are open to the heavens? These hands symbolize our readiness to receive help with a bit of humility. Thanks, Joni. And God, and the idea that God will provide. The hands also speak to the universal dynamics of giving and receiving, which we practice in A Course in Miracles, saying that they're both equally the same. These hands are equal to each other. This is a crucial part of our spiritual evolution. There are so many branches of wisdom in trees, no pun intended, but there's so much that you can get from trees. So this is also who we get to be. Like, am I rooted into receiving and receiving what is good and beautiful and holy? Am I extending? How comfortable are you with receiving help or asking for help even? Does it feel vulnerable, too risky, or even maybe out of the question? And how does it feel to extend to others? Are you hesitant? Are you resistant when someone asks for help? Or even when you see somebody struggling on the street, do you just turn your head and walk by? Do you turn your head and walk by and feel like I should have done something? Or do you stop and ask the Holy Spirit, what would you have me do? Do you feel irritated by that? Do you feel closed off when faced with someone else's neediness? If you're a singer, do you share your voice when asked? Or do you find excuses and say, no. Or perhaps maybe even with your giving, you overextend, you make commitments that you kind of struggle to keep. Saying, I can do everything, I can do everything, I can do everything. And then you end up letting yourself and other people down because you've overextended. Smart trees don't overextend. So you might want to use this opportunity to reflect on your generosity. How generous do you feel you are? And with whom? Is your generosity unconditional, or do you have hidden expectations? Because where you give is not always where you receive. That's what the tree also shows us. But the tree also knows that as it gives, it always receives. The roots and the branches give and receive. And that's how we stay balanced. That's how we can embrace a more profound understanding of our place in the world and our fitafata, our interconnection with everyone. So I've spent many hours of my life making pilgrimages to sacred places, looking for the mother. They have this book out now called The Mother Tree, and I relate to that because I'm always looking for my mother. When I went to Ireland, I was looking for my mother, my mother tongue. When I went early on, my first pilgrimage was Yugoslavia, when I was looking to see the mother, the Blessed Mother. These children were having apparitions of her, and I went there because I was in love with the Blessed Mother, but I also went there because I had lost my mother, and I was looking to reroute. But as many pilgrimages that I've gone on, I can tell you without exception that there are not any out there that can be more spiritually fruitful than just sitting beneath your favorite tree. I swear, when meditating beneath your favorite tree, so much can be figured out. I once meditated with friends in this grove of trees, and I was given this direction that I still follow today, which is simply heard this voice that said, the more you surrender, the more you'll remember. The more you surrender, the more you'll remember. And I remember coming out of that meditation thinking, oh, I have to practice this. I have to let go of everything so that I can remember, so I can remember God. And you might remember the story Siddhartha, who later became Buddha. And he said to have attained enlightenment while meditating under a Bodhi tree. Bodhi tree is this large fig tree that is located in India. So maybe you want to do that. When you're confused, when you feel disconnected, go sit under a tree. This talk is the first in a series of chakras. So we're going to cover the chakras in a little bit of an outside the box, unauthorized way, as usual. So this one is about the root system, but of course, we're not just talking about the roots, we're talking about the whole tree. Now, we often talk about the roots. We talk about being rooted. We talk about being present. We talk about the power of now. I think you got that. And if you don't got that, you can work on that. There's so many ways you can stay rooted. Do yoga classes, join us on the morning calls, get into meditation, figure out what makes you feel rooted. And then once you do that, what I think is more of a challenge for many people is reaching into your greater good. So I want to challenge you not to make rooting your final destination, because being here and now is great. Rooting does not mean that we root so deeply that we go dormant or into hibernation or some spiritual catatonic state where you just get so rooted that you're of no help to anyone. Buddha sat down under the tree, but don't you know, he also rose up. And that's why we know him, because he rose up like the lotus flower. And so should you. We cannot rise from shifting sands, so you have to establish a foundation that is solid, that we do with spiritual practice. We can't really reach from being unrooted. So first is stillness, and then from that place, let yourself extend so that you can tickle the heavens with your branches and fulfill your dawn. Again, your dawn is your calling, your craft. The acorn does not grow complacent in its acornness. It doesn't stop at being an acorn, because then it would never know what lives on the scope, the internal scope of its potential. It lets itself die to its smallness 1,000 times an hour in order to honor the limitless magnitude of its creator, and it becomes an oak tree, and then it becomes an orchard from one little acorn. This is the same for you, because you do not want to die with all of your music still in you. This past week, as Mary was saying, I got to record a song for my grandmother. And this is my soul tickling the heavens. This is me reaching past my comfort zone and, extending. And it feels scary, as it should. We don't want to die in our comfort zones. Nothing good happens there. Next week, I'm going to be, as Mari was saying, I'm going to be launching the Maiden Voyage for our 3rd round, but just the first archetype. It's a 7-week class that we're doing just based on the maiden. This maiden is the archetype which covers and uncovers all the blocks to our rising up and stepping out. That's what the maiden does. It's not always easy to go from an acorn to an orchard, especially if you're just starting to grow your branches. But this is what Hasev says, who is a beautiful poet. He says, run, my dear, from anyone and anything that does not strengthen your precious budding wings. You're meant to fly. So I'm going to share with you a few bits about the maiden. And if you relate, you can sign up for that class, which we'll meet on Monday mornings and evenings for 7 weeks. The maiden has to leave. That's what she does. This is just like the hero's journey. You have to leave. And just like trees must grow, you have to go. This is a part of the dawn. And so our voyage begins when we outgrow the ordinary and we release the known, and we move into the mystery, and we leave the safety of the familiar harbors that requires deep courage to do this. And by the way, we navigate this threshold with confidence and with grace, and it will carry us into our future relationships. When the act of leaving, when you first left your harbors as a kid, or as going off to college, or getting married, or however you left, Sometimes you leave burdened with fear or cloaked with guilt or disloyalty, and it can leave a person hesitant and unsure their entire life, causing them to second guess themselves at every threshold because they had an awkward exit. So the weight of self-doubt can make, some prefer even the safety of stagnation over the pursuit of tickling the heavens, over the pursuit of freedom or Sersha. Remember, Sersha means freedom. And many may never even leave. They never even question. They never seek to experience the sweet, like soreness of a good stretch. You know, when you get a good stretch and you're like, oh, that feels so good. Some people never do that. They stay stagnant. So instead, what they do, if you don't stretch, what you'll be prone to do is link arms with other um, broken maidens, I want to say, who are similarly blocked, finding false comfort in gossip and drinking or, harsh criticism. However, you know what that looks like. You've even come through that tribe. I know I did. Like that was the thing. You just sat around and drank and just like complained and kvetched, and you never actually created anything because there was a lot of scar tissue there about leaving. And so you stayed comfortable in your stagnant state, which only further erodes your confidence about leaving. And others remain stuck out of mistrust and fearing the unknown. Well, you know what? You got to get comfortable with that because that's the whole thing about the unknown is it's unknown. That's the mystery. And ultimately a part of us departs our home of origin with a mix of being pushed by pain or pulled by vision. And like I said, it'd be best to be pulled by vision, to let that inner spark boil from your roots, your well-rooted nature, and allow yourself to push and grow and bloom into that greater orchard that you're designed to be. If you think that kind of a conversation might be helpful for you to look at your stories and your scar tissue, then take some time to contemplate that with your internal teacher. And then if you're meant to, join us at the Maiden Voyage. The program comes with a couple of one-on-one coachings with me, and I'm really good at that. Not good at a lot of things. I'm not good at a lot of things, but I'm good at waking people up from nightmares and gently seducing them into their self-realization. That's my dawn, and after many, many years and many, many hours of sitting, I know myself. God, what a good thing to have knowledge around is yourself and what you do and what you don't do. So although I have so much more to share with you about trees, and hopefully that will come out in the conversation, I wanted to close with this. When a tree falls in the forest, let's hope it does fall in the forest and not get cut down, but we sometimes have to cut down trees. But when a tree falls and we get a glimpse into the life a tree carries its own eulogy, its own elegy. Elegy is, that word means a poem of serious reflection, typically a lamenting of the dead. So the tree carries its elegy, as do you. And so we can read the elegy of a tree's life if we know how to read between the lines. And by lines, I mean the rings that are left behind. If you ever seen a tree stump, and I know you have because you haven't been living under a rock, you probably noticed that there on the top of the stump is a series of concentric rings. And these rings can tell you how long the tree is, how old it is, and even what the weather was like during the life of the tree. And it shows what the tree has endured, the years of ease and the years of difficulty, that this is true for us as well. What has left a ring on you? When our last hours arrive here and our rings are read, what will they say? How many chapters will there be? These rings don't just show us how long we lived, but how well we lived. Do you allow yourself to push past the boundaries of fear? Did you stay steady in the winters when you stood naked against the storms? Did you turn those traumas into triumphs and grow past the perimeters that once placed support on you, like that couple placed that binding around that tree, and that binding that could once maybe threaten to hold you back? Like my late neighbor's tree, did you grow past it? Did you grow past it so far that no one would even know that you were once struck by lightning? So I'm pretty excited about the Maiden Voyage curriculum because it's also a writing program. And I think those who hold the pen hold the power. And it's important for us to acknowledge our stories. And it was created first for me. And it helped me to understand my own rings, my own circles and cycles, and all of my writing and all of my books and stand-ups and sermons. All of that come from my self-knowing, from my owning my own voice and my vocabulary, my cycles, my circles, my creations. Writing has been my dan. It allows me to take people to locations that their feet will never get to connect with. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, this is what writing can do. And when I'm dead, and when they read my rings, that's what it will say. She helped people find their voice because she found her own. What will your rings say? What will be read when they read your rings? When your rings are read, will they paint a true picture of how you showed up? Will you write your books? Will you have your babies? Will you birth your businesses? Will you tickle the heavens? Will you die knowing that you will never die because your creation lives in the Fitta Fata, interconnected with everything that is ever, ever living? The interwoven connection that lives between all things. I wonder about that. And I think you should too. Answers can be found at the root of a tree. And that's the word.
Now it's time for our truly unique experience of Speakeasy Sunday service, our community conversation. That's where we invite you to speak easily, find your voice and your truth, and share your thoughts, inspirations, awareness, and questions in the community. And I'll get us started by just one or two little observations. Firstly, that's an amazing talk, Maureen. Thank you so much. Trees, I think everybody loves trees, but recently, because I walk my dogs, and I'm sure a lot of you do, in a little forest, and I've got to thinking that trees actually are probably really highly evolved beings, more than us. That, you know, they don't bother moving. Everything comes to them. They've really got it sussed. And I think they also incorporate a lot of spirits too. So that's just one observation. And yesterday I was at a innovative farming thing that was going on near the lake. And they were talking about encouraging farmers to use the space within the woodland on their farms, rather than chopping the woodland down, but just to kind of think about clearing it a little bit and using that space for livestock. And they had a lovely concept of how the trees really looked after livestock, particularly young animals, and they called the livestock within the woodlands as if they were in a living barn. And I thought that was really special. So those are my two little observations.
Yeah, I love that, Mary. I agree with you. I totally think that trees are enlightened beings. They're like our ancient grandmothers and grandfathers. They're like rooted stars. Like when we look up at the stars, we have such awe. When you look at trees, you can find that kind of awe. Yeah, I had this other story that a woman shared this past weekend. It was actually Ajit, that amazing singer. And she was saying that she was talking about the trees. And she was saying this thing about the birch trees, which, if you're a parent, perk up your ears, because I found this specifically interesting in regards to parents. And she said that like the birch is one of the first one to come into the forest, and then it creates such a good soil that it kind of welcomes these oak trees, and these oak trees begin to grow around the birch tree, and they kind of snuff it out. And because they grab all the sun, and they kind of can snuff out the birch tree, but then the birch tree lets itself die and become compost to the roots of the oak tree. And so when I was thinking about that, I'm like, oh my God, that's like parenting. You know what I mean? Like you hold space for these new beings, and then they hopefully outreach you. You know, we want our children to outreach us. And then like, what else is there for us to do when we die, but just like continue to nurture those roots? And I just found it to be really interesting. Sincerely, like there's lots of books written on trees, but there's lots of oral tradition around trees that and the more you talk to people about trees, and maybe this week, like bring up conversation about trees, go where trees are, and see if there isn't some lessons for you in trees, or see if you don't actually learn something like like what you just shared, Mary. I found that to be so interesting and almost like a necessary awareness about our environment, because without trees, we're dead. I mean, they are what gives us oxygen, these trees. They're our very breath. They're the bridge to our breath. And I'll tell you something else. Being in Ireland, this island in the middle of the ocean, the air quality is incredible because because of the trees.
Hey, good morning. Yeah, definitely. It's interesting. I went to a friend's memorial service and his daughter got up and talked about how her father took her to see the redwoods. And when you mentioned in your story today that sometimes something speaks to you, I thought, I'm going to go. I'm going to take my son there. I want to see these wonders. And we did plant a tree when my son was born, and every year we'd take a picture. It was a serviceberry tree. Then, unfortunately, when we left our home, the tree actually passed, which was interesting. But we used the stump and we decorated it at Christmas time. The last year we were there, and we moved to our new place, and we have a tree right outside our back. And there was certain trees, if you don't prune them right at the beginning, they will branch out so much that the heavy branches will actually cause it to fall. And so one of the branches from the tree in our current backyard had done that, and it was falling apart. And we did bind the tree, and we actually found an arborist that they said, well, let's see, maybe we can just kind of trim off where that branch had broken and see if the tree will stay. And oh my God, the tree has stayed. We continue to have shade on our porch. And I was just so grateful because we had a couple people come out because we wanted to save the tree. And there have been many times in my life where I feel like a connection to trees. And it's nice to see that they're kind of with us along the ride. So I appreciate what you shared. And the hard part about going to see the redwoods and the sequoias is I think I have to stay in the conversation because when I thought we could go is not the best time to go. So I do want to go. I don't want it to move away. And I
Yeah.
wondered when you talked about the 25 trees in the Ogham alphabet, those might not have been mentioned. And I'm thinking maybe that alphabet was regional. You know what I'm saying? Like to the trees that are in that area,
Yes, probably.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
probably. And so, and maybe the trees that were mentioned, maybe there is a relationship to the redwoods. The redwoods are so interesting though, because I think they are the oldest living thing on earth. I think they predate Jesus, and they reach so high, but their roots are so shallow. And you probably have heard this already, but the reason that they can have such shallow roots is pitta fata. They are interconnected with each other. When one goes down, they all go down. One stays up, they all stay up. I mean, if that's not a beautiful lesson in community and how we need each other, I don't know what is. And again, from the trees.
Well, first of all, Maureen, you always hit it. You always knock it out of the park with whatever you talk about. And I loved so many things you said. I was taking notes like a tree doesn't overextend its branches. I'm actually looking outside. When I moved into this house, I called it the tree house because I'm surrounded by tree. If you can look out the window, there's just trees everywhere.
Yeah.
It's annoying as hell because the leaves get all over my deck, but I just feel like I'm in the tree sometimes. But mostly what was hitting me when you were talking is I had been using that tree metaphor recently when I wrote a little thing about my experience living in France and feeling really lonely, and then comparing it to my life now. And like, this is in college. This was, I don't know, 30 years ago and or more, honestly. And how I still felt like this tree, that the trunk was the same. Some of these feelings were so similar, but the rings are wider, the wisdom is more, but some of that loneliness is still there, but I don't feel alone anymore. Like what I've learned that we are like a tree trunk and we extend these branches and we have these evolutions, but at the core, we are the same and we're rooted. So I just love a tree metaphor and, no mistakes. As you were talking, I was looking for something and I bought a little tree pendant when I was in Bali. And I just happened to find it right now as I'm like, yeah, I need to put that back on. Anyway, I just loved it. I loved many of the things you said about the tree metaphor. So just thank you. And also trees in different countries. When I was in Ireland, we went to my kids wanted to go to some of the Game of Thrones locations, and there's the tree forest where they walk through. So we went there, and just how that mystical feeling when you are in the middle of a row of trees.
Oh,
And then just coming back from Africa, there's these big babao tree. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but just the trees in different countries. You talked about the birch tree. That's really fascinating. So just, yeah, I guess I'm just all in agreement. Don't really have a question, but it's just a beautiful metaphor to take into my Sunday. Thank you.
you're so welcome. Good to see you. And
Yeah.
thanks for sharing, because yeah, it's interesting. Like what I think about, like, are trees lonely? You know what I mean? But like, I don't think they are, because they think they hold such integrity that they, because loneliness comes from the idea that I'm not enough
Mm,
as I am, that I
mm,
need something from someone else to make me feel worthy. But the tree roots so far into its standing in the world, its presence in the world, and then it reaches towards its delight, and it might mingle its delight with other people's delight. Those branches on the high end might mingle with each other, but they don't complete each other. Underneath, they hold each other in community, but they don't. So there's an interesting thing there. And I feel like one of the greatest things that we can do for ourselves is to fully know ourselves, not as an answer to your question and not as a question to your answer, but just I know myself. I can't know what's best for you. You cannot know what's best for me. And for me to assume that you could know what's best for me is going to get me into a lot of problems. But if I can know myself, and the tree can give me that example, is that I root into my knowing, I reach into my knowing, and then my solitude can give you permission to hold your own standing. And from there, then we have power. Then we have Sirsha. Then we have freedom. Not an easy thing to do. None of this is easy.
mm. And sometimes that tree may need a little pruning,
Mhm.
but that's not me telling you what to do. That's just me assisting your growth. I loved the other example you gave about parenting, and I heard this thing from a friend recently, like when you do a great job as a parent, you get laid off.
Mm.
And it sucks.
That's the mark of success. But yeah, I was just thinking about this interconnectedness of the tree roots. And Clive, who sometimes sings on here, is a tree surgeon, and he has he told me that this does happen in practice. So if a tree dies in the midst of the tree network, saplings have permission then from within the tree network to start to grow. They're kind of held at a certain height or size in readiness. So it is so intelligent. This is why I think they're really evolved. They've really got it sussed.
Yeah, it is beautiful. And the other lesson they give us is like they're okay with they die every year. They bloom their foliage, and then like they let themselves be enjoyed in that state, and then they let themselves be enjoyed in their aging, their coloring. None of us ever think to go around and spray paint trees green again when they turn at their most vibrant hours towards when they let go, and they show us how to let go. I mean, there's just so many wonderful things. And there's this quote that I also love, which is plant trees that you don't intend to sit under. So like there's this idea of paying it forward. There's this idea of paying,
Yeah.
like there's just so much beauty that can be distilled from sitting in a forest. I suppose that would be my call to action, is like this week, if you can, like even if it looks as minor as like taking your shoes off and walking in your grass or your neighbor's grass or some park around you, it's to the point of like seeing if you can go all the way to a forest and sit and meditate in a forest. Just see what happens. Well, have a beautiful week, everybody. Get connected with your roots. Keep tickling the heavens. Be fearless. And we'll see you next week. God bless. Bye.